In a galaxy where navigation was impossible without hyper-advanced computers, the aliens believed humans were helpless wanderers of the void. That belief shattered the night a human stepped outside, raised his eyes to the sky, and said, "I'll guide us home using the stars." The Arkle Dominion had mapped most of the spiral arm, and every voyage, no matter how short, was plotted by navigation cores powered by quantum entanglement. Even a simple drift through a nebula required thousands of calculations per second. To the Archelians, traveling without a machine was as unthinkable as breathing without air. So when the survey ship Viera malfunctioned in the uncharted Perseus cluster, its crew faced panic. Their navcore had burned out in a flare of static discharge. Without it, they were blind, unable to align with subspace lanes, unable to jump, unable to even plot a course back to the nearest beacon. The crew gathered in the command chamber, their luminous eyes flickering nervously. Captain Gyrell, her voice clipped with anxiety, addressed the only human on board, Lieutenant Marcus Hale. He was the mission's cultural liaison. Not an engineer, not a navigator by their standards, not even useful in a crisis. "We are stranded," she told him. "Our only hope is rescue. Without a navigation core, we cannot move. We must wait." Marcus leaned back in his chair, unfazed. He'd been calm in situations that should have broken men before war zones, deep-sea expeditions, nights lost in deserts. He gazed at the alien faces staring at him, their terror almost palpable. "Wait," he asked softly. "You think we can't find our way without a computer?" Gyrell's tone hardened. "Even a child of our kind knows navigation is impossible without the core. No one alive can calculate trajectory by instinct." Marcus gave a half-smile, the kind that carried a quiet defiance. "Where I come from, people crossed oceans long before machines. They found their way by looking up." The aliens blinked, confused. Looking up, Marcus stood, walked toward the observation deck, and gestured for them to follow. The shutters retracted, revealing a glittering field of stars. To the Archelians, it was a dizzying chaos of meaningless lights. To Marcus, it was a map. "You call this chaos," he said, his voice steady. "I call it order. The stars are constant. They've guided my ancestors for thousands of years, and they can guide us now." Silence hung in the chamber. To them, it was madness, primitive, foolish. Yet something in Marcus's tone held conviction. He pointed to a cluster shining faintly in the distance. "That's Orion. I know its orientation. From that, I can tell where we are in relation to Earth's arm of the galaxy. Give me time, and I'll plot a course. Not with a machine, with my eyes." The aliens exchanged wary glances. Could a human truly navigate the void with nothing but starlight? The observation deck grew quiet except for the hum of the failing systems. The Archelians stood in a semicircle around Marcus, their expressions somewhere between disbelief and fascination. Captain Gyrell finally broke the silence, her voice edged with restrained irritation. "Lieutenant Hale, this is not the age of wooden ships and sails. This is the void. Your constellations cannot possibly guide us through a star cluster spanning light years." Marcus didn't argue. He simply tapped the glass dome where Orion's belt glowed faintly. "That pattern," he said, "is the same one sailors used on Earth to find east when the oceans seemed endless. Different sky, same principle. The stars don't lie. They tell us where we are if you know how to listen." The aliens muttered among themselves. Veyra's chief analyst Keithor leaned forward, his translucent crest flickering nervously. "Stars shift with parallax. They bend with the gravity wells of nearby masses. No organic brain can hold the necessary reference data. It's impossible." Marcus chuckled. "Impossible is a word people use before they learn better. Look, I don't need to memorize every star in the galaxy, just a handful of anchor points. We're not finding every answer, just a direction." He pulled a greased pencil from his uniform pocket, knelt by the metal floor, and began sketching crude lines. Orion's belt, then the arc toward Sirius, then triangulation toward the galactic center. The Archelians watched, bewildered, as he translated the void into shapes simple enough for a child to grasp. "This," Marcus explained, circling 2 points, "tells us galactic east. This gives us approximate tilt. With a little patience, I can chart relative bearings." Gyrell's skepticism wavered as she studied his crude drawing. The lines meant nothing to her, yet the confidence in his tone carried weight. She folded her arms. "And if your guess is wrong, one error could put us into the gravity well of a brown dwarf. Or worse, drift us into interstellar emptiness with no hope of recovery." Marcus looked up at her, eyes steady. "Then I'll own that mistake. But if we sit here waiting, you'll run out of supplies before a rescue beacon ever reaches us. Your nav core isn't coming back. It's this, or nothing." The blunt truth settled over the crew like a cold wind. They had no alternatives. Finally, Kitha stepped forward, his voice hesitant. If you succeed, human, then it means your species carries an ability long thought obsolete. You'd be doing what our greatest navigators, with all their tools, would never dare. Marcus shrugged. Call it instinct, call it experience. Where I'm from, you didn't survive by waiting for rescue. You survived by moving. He rose, and with a calm authority that surprised even himself, he gestured toward the dome of stars. I'll need time. Hours, maybe days. But I'll find us a heading, and when I do, you'll see just how much your people underestimated mine. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, doubt gnawing at their logic. Yet, beneath it, something else flickered curiosity. For the first time, the Archelians wondered if the strange, fragile human might not be as helpless as they had always assumed. Marcus claimed a section of the observation deck for his work. The Archelians provided him with star charts, raw data feeds, and hologrids, but he pushed them aside. Instead, he asked for something they hadn't used in centuries, a sheet of paper and a pencil. The aliens watched, baffled, as he sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching rough star maps by hand. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. He'd glance at the dome above, find a cluster, sketch its angle, then jot down short notes. To them, it looked chaotic, meaningless scribbles. To him, it was order. Kitha hovered behind him, wringing his delicate claws. You are discarding the instruments. You ignore the sensors. Marcus didn't look up. Sensors give you raw numbers. I don't need numbers. I need relationships, angles, distances, patterns. The human eye sees patterns better than any machine, the analyst scoffed. Machines never miss details. Organic eyes always do. Marcus smirked. Maybe, but machines don't improvise. They don't adapt when half the data's missing. Out here, with a dead navcore, your machines are useless. My eyes aren't. Hours passed. The crew grew restless. Gyrol paced at the edge of the deck, her patience thin. This feels like madness, she muttered. We are wasting precious cycles. But as the star maps grew under Marcus's pencil, something began to emerge, a rough outline of their position relative to the galactic arm. He marked Orion, Sirius, Aldebaran, and then a faint smudge he recognized as the Andromeda line. Each became an anchor, a fixed point in an ocean of uncertainty. Finally, he stood, paper in hand, and pointed toward a faint streak across the dome. That's the galactic equator. If I align Orion's belt against it, we can orient ourselves east to west. From there, we drift until we catch the pull of the nearest beacon system. The aliens leaned forward, their luminous eyes widening. To them, the streak of stars had always been decoration, not direction. Now Marcus was weaving meaning from it as if he were decoding a forgotten language. Kitha's crest flickered nervously. This could work. But the precision, the risk of error. Marcus cut him off. Navigation's never about zero risk. It's about reducing uncertainty. You people are so dependent on your tech, you've forgotten how to trust anything else. Out here, you don't get perfect. You get enough to keep moving. Gyrol approached him, her tall frame casting a shadow across the floor. Her voice, usually sharp with command, was quieter now. If you're wrong, Marcus Hale, you doom us all. He met her gaze, unwavering. If I'm right, Captain, I'll save us. Silence followed. The crew's doubt hadn't vanished, but a seed of belief had been planted. They began to see him not as a primitive outsider, but as something rarer, a navigator of the impossible. And as the Viera adjusted its thrusters toward the direction Marcus indicated, the stars themselves seemed to shift, not for the Archelians, but for the lone human who dared to read them. The ship Viera drifted silently as its thrusters fired in short, careful bursts. The Archelians monitored every adjustment, their hands poised over controls in case Marcus's course veered them into danger. But the human was calm, almost serene, as if he were back on Earth beneath a clear night sky rather than adrift in uncharted space. Marcus stood by the dome, his gaze locked on Orion's belt and the faint shimmer of the galactic equator. He called out small corrections with quiet confidence. 2 degrees starboard. Hold for 20 seconds. Now ease back steady, Kitha muttered under his breath. He makes it sound like sailing a wind current. We are crossing gravitational fields, magnetic anomalies, particle storms. This is not the sea. Marcus smiled faintly. You'd be surprised how similar it feels. The stars are my compass. The void has its currents. You just have to learn to sense them. The Archelians exchanged nervous glances. His words sounded poetic, almost mystically, yet the ship responded smoothly. The sensors confirmed they were on a steady course rather than tumbling aimlessly. Hours turned into a full cycle. The crew grew restless again, checking their dwindling rations, their damaged navcore, their failing beacon. Gyral remained stern but silent, her eyes flicking often toward the human. Doubt still weighed on her, but something in Marcus's composure kept her from calling a halt. Then, as they passed the edge of a dense starfield, Marcus leaned closer to the glass, his breath fogging the surface. "There," he whispered. "See that cluster? 7 stars. Faint but aligned. Back home, we called it the Pleiades. That means we're angled right closer to a beacon system than before." The crew turned, scanning the data readouts. To their astonishment, the sensors confirmed a faint gravitational tug in the direction Marcus had indicated. They weren't drifting blind anymore. Kitha's crest flared in disbelief. He predicted a system before our long-range scans detected it, with his eyes. For the first time, Giral's mask of command cracked. She turned to Marcus. "How could you possibly know?" Marcus shrugged, as though the answer were obvious. "Because the stars tell you, if you pay attention. Patterns, Captain. The universe writes its own map. My people learned to read it long before we had engines." The crew fell silent, their skepticism cracking under the weight of evidence. The ship adjusted again, following Marcus's bearings. Minutes stretched into hours. The void was still vast, still deadly, but now it no longer felt directionless. Gyral finally spoke, her voice quieter than before. "Perhaps your kind is not as fragile as we believed." Marcus gave her a small grin. "Fragile, maybe, but never helpless." For the first time since their navcore had failed, hope stirred aboard the Vieira, and though no alien would yet admit it aloud, every eye now turned to Marcus as though he were not merely their cultural liaison, but their navigator. The Vieira sailed on Marcus's course, hope rising with every passing hour. Yet space has a way of testing those who grow too comfortable. The warning klaxons rang first shrill and alien, echoing through the metallic halls. Gyral snapped her head to the command console, her eyes narrowing. Electromagnetic storm front approaching fast, the display filled with chaotic waves of data, a surge of charged particles, twisting magnetic currents, and turbulent radiation, a storm born from a newborn star's violent pulse. For Arcolian ships, storms like this were avoided with meticulous algorithms and precise computer-guided jumps. But Vieira had no nav. The crew erupted in panic. "We cannot hold course without computational correction," one shouted. "We must shut down systems and wait it out," cried another. Marcus didn't flinch. His eyes went to the dome, searching the sky beyond the static interference. "No," he said firmly. "If we just drift, we'll be swallowed whole. We move through it. Ride it like a wave." Kitha's crest pulsed wildly. "Ride it. This is not an ocean, human. The storm will tear us apart." Marcus crouched by his paper maps, his pencil flying across the page, sketching hurried vectors. He looked up, his jaw set. "I've seen storms before. Not like this, but close enough. The trick isn't to fight the current, it's to let it push you where it wants, and steer just enough to stay alive." The aliens stared at him as if he were insane. Yet when Gyral demanded alternatives, none could answer. "Marcus Hale," she said, her voice hard with command. "If we trust you now, and you are wrong, this crew will die." He met her gaze without hesitation. "If you don't, you'll die anyway. Your choice." The ship shuddered violently as the storm struck, making the hull groan like a wounded beast. Lights flickered, the air thrummed with static. Marcus barked orders like a seasoned captain. "Port thrusters, half burst, hold steady on the roll. Good now, starboard, quick correction. Watch the tilt." The Archelians obeyed, their claws flying across controls, their disbelief overridden by sheer survival instinct. Each adjustment Marcus gave seemed reckless at first, yet the ship slipped between surges, catching turbulent pockets that carried them forward instead of tearing them apart. Outside, the stars blurred in a storm of charged particles, streaks of light bending and warping. To the aliens, it was chaos. To Marcus, it was a pattern. He read it like a sailor reading the surface of a dark sea under moonlight. The storm howled around them for endless minutes, every second a razor's edge. The ship groaned, systems screamed in protest, but Marcus never wavered. Then suddenly silence. The static faded. The storm peeled away, leaving the void clear once more. The Vieira emerged, battered but intact. The crew collapsed into stunned silence. Kitha whispered hoarsely, "It should not be possible. He guided us through blind." Gyral turned to Marcus, her luminous eyes wide, not with doubt this time but with awe. "Human," she said slowly, You are more dangerous and more extraordinary than we imagined. Marcus simply leaned back, exhaled, and smiled faintly. Told you. The stars always lead the way. The silence aboard the Vieira was heavier than the storm had been. The Arcolian crew stood frozen, their luminous eyes fixed on Marcus. For the first time since the NAV course failure, no one questioned him. No one doubted. Gyril approached, her tall form casting a long shadow across the observation deck. She studied him with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read, part pride, part unease, part something deeper. You let us through, she said softly, almost to herself. Without machines. Without algorithms. You read the void as though it spoke your language. Marcus gave a tired chuckle. It doesn't speak. You just learn to listen. My ancestors didn't have engines or navcores. They had the stars. That's all I needed too. The paper maps lay scattered on the deck, crude sketches of constellations and vectors. To the aliens, they looked like a child's doodles, yet those doodles had saved their lives. A soft chime broke the silence. One of the junior officers rushed to the console. His crest flickered rapidly with disbelief. Captain, we've picked up a beacon signal. We are within range of the Delthari system. If we follow, we can reach a repair station in 2 cycles. The crew erupted in relief. Some wept openly, others clasped their clawed hands in gratitude. But all of them turned to Marcus, the fragile human who had guided them where their technology could not. Gyril straightened, her voice ringing across the deck. Mark this day, crew of the Vieira, we live because of Lieutenant Marcus Hale, a human, a navigator without a core. Remember this before you call his kind fragile again. Marcus felt heat rise in his chest, but he stayed quiet. He didn't need speeches. He simply watched the stars with the faintest smile, knowing they had never betrayed him. Later, as the ship adjusted course toward the beacon, Kither approached him hesitantly. The analyst's usual arrogance had melted away. Human, I studied navigation my entire life. We rely on machines because they are flawless, yet you— He struggled for words. You saw what I could not. Tell me, could you teach us? Marcus considered the question. He looked out the viewport where the constellations shimmered like old friends. Maybe, but it's not something you cram into a database. It's patience, trust, time under the stars. If you want to learn, you'll have to be willing to forget the machines for a while. Kither bowed his head slightly, a gesture Marcus knew meant respect. By the time they reached the Delthari repair station, word had already spread through the Arcolian fleet. Whispers told of a human who navigated by stars, who defied the impossible. To some, it was myth. To others, it was proof that humanity possessed skills no machine could replicate. When Marcus finally stepped off the ship, he looked back at the dome of stars one last time. To the Archelians, it was still chaos. To him, it was a map, as steady and faithful as ever. And from that day forward, the Archelians no longer called him simply cultural liaison. They called him what his ancestors had always been, navigator of the stars.